We continue walking through Advent. We arrive at this third Sunday, and we talk about what it's like to be patient as we continue to wait. Have you ever had this said to you? If you could be patient, that'd be great. Anybody? Okay, a few truth tellers with us today. Yeah, being patient is hard, isn't it? We tend not to easily be patient. We tend not to like to wait. I mean, as young children, we don't like to wait for it to be time to open the presents under the tree. As we get older, we get impatient for food to be done, or for packages to be delivered, or for guests to arrive. We get impatient waiting in traffic. You know, there's nothing worse than driving on a parkway when you're literally parked, right? Yeah. And even, it's ironic, as you know, people are in hospitals, we call them patients, right? And yet, in the hospital, many of us can be the least patient people on the planet. It is hard to be patient when we live in a microwave and next day delivery world. Patience is hard. And when we get impatient, sometimes we even grumble and whine and complain and stomp our feet a little bit and maybe throw just a full-blown 2-year-old fit, right? Screaming, ranting, it happens, doesn't it? No matter what stage of life we're in, it seems that being patient is hard. And as a parent, I have not always been the most patient with my children, especially trying to teach them something, right? They just aren't getting it, and it can't be me, because I'm a phenomenal teacher, right? Why aren't they getting it? And that's probably a mix of a whole lot of things there. And sometimes it takes longer than we're willing to wait. As a pastor, I've been known to get impatient to have things done and accomplished. We have this in our relationships. We have this in our occupations. We have this as we live our daily lives. And yet James is here to tell us to be patient and to do so without grumbling. Wow. A tough task. The word patient in our text can also mean endurance, constancy, steadfastness, perseverance, forbearance, and long suffering. That's the variety of meanings that are there for this word that our translators have chosen to lay out as patience. And even with that circle of meaning, it doesn't make it a whole lot easier, does it? As James is writing to his hearers, he spends a lot of the book talking about caring for people, about doing the right thing. The verses that precede the ones that we dig into today in our text deal with the wealthy abusing the poor and how bad that is. And yet all the while, James knows these people are waiting for Jesus to come back. As Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, he wrote to a people who were also waiting. And it is believed that they thought that Jesus was going to come back, and so they just quit their jobs and they stood out in the field and looked up at the sky. And they waited for the people that James and Paul and Peter and John wrote to in the New Testament time. They thought that Jesus was going to come back within their lifetime. And so they waited. And they pushed through the persecution that was there, and maybe a little of the mockery, as people may have said, well, you know, where is this Jesus that you said is coming back? He's not here yet. They also lived under constant threat of losing their homes, losing their belongings, being dragged out of their houses into prison, and potentially being put to death because of their faith. And James is here to tell them to be patient. To be patient as they wait for that great and glorious day when Jesus comes back again. And as he talks to them about patience, he talks to them about farmers. How many of you here grew up on farms? Okay, handful of us, right? And none of you decided to stay on the farm. How ironic. Farming is a tough way to make a living. I contend that it is one of the most faith-based occupations on the planet, because you have to trust in God to provide everything. He provides you with seed that you put in soil that needs to have the right nutrients, and then the rain has to come in the right season, and then you need the sun at the right time, and it can't be too wet at the beginning because then you can't get in the field to put the seed down, and it can't be too wet at the end because then you can't get it in the field to pull the crop out. Oh man, it's a tough way to make a living, tough way to make a life, tough way to supply food for the entire population, which is really the task of those who farm. To put food in the grocery stores so it's there for people like me to go get. Because I'd rather stand in line at a grocery store than wait for a seed to germinate and a plant to grow, and then a vegetable or a fruit or some grain to come off of that plant, and then to get those things picked and processed as they need to, and then finally get them to the table. Farming takes a lot of patience. For the people in the region where James is writing to, they had a little bit of rain that came in the fall, a little bit that came in the spring, and then 3/4 of their rain fell between December and February. And if it didn't fall then, it wasn't going to fall. As Stacy and I spent our first 10 years of ministry in the state of Kansas, we got to know a lot of people who farmed, especially when we lived in Colby. And farmers have remarkable personalities. The high school football team can win the state championship. They say, yep. The world is going to end. And the answer is, yep. Very steady, And I think it comes from this reality of being patient and standing firm and just saying, okay, we go through these cycles year in and year out. And sometimes we get a bumper crop, and sometimes we don't. But we keep on going, and we keep on going. And that's the type of patience, the type of steadfastness, the type of constancy and endurance that James is urging his hearers and us. But James didn't only talk about farmers, he talked about prophets as well. And can you imagine being a prophet in the Old Testament? Hundreds of years before Jesus showed up. And they're laying out these prophecies about this Messiah who is going to come. And one after another, they're still doing the same thing, laying out these prophecies about this Messiah who is going to come. Who is going to come. Who is going to come. And then there's John the Baptist saying, the kingdom of heaven is near. And yet even after he baptizes Jesus, he's in prison. And he sends messengers to Jesus to see, are you really the one? Are you really the one who was to come? And then these are Jesus' words back to him. He says, go back and report to John what you see and hear. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. Jesus never gives a simple yes or no, does he? John's disciples come wondering if he is the Messiah. And he says, look, this was prophesied by Isaiah. This is what I read in the temple, in my home church, when I kicked off my ministry. And this is what I am doing. And so John gets to wait there in prison. And yet he's there for the first coming. He's there for part of Jesus' life and ministry. And yet here we sit waiting for Jesus to come back. Waiting for that day when he has his triumphant return. James also wrote about Job. The patience of Job, that's a phrase that has been uttered in our culture. And it refers back to this man in the Old Testament, Job, who was a very wealthy man, a wealthy farmer and rancher. He had lots of crops. He had lots of livestock. He had a large family. And in one day, all of it was taken away. Natural disasters and raiders and a roof falling in on a house where his children were. And he gets to wait. He and his wife are left. And after losing their children, she's grieving. She's bitter. She looks at Job and says, "Why can you have such hope? Why don't you just curse God and die?" And there he sits. And we track with Job through 40 chapters where he's wrestling with God, where his friends are wondering, "Job, what was it that you did wrong?" And Job's waiting, and he's waiting, and he's waiting for God to provide a positive outcome to this brutally hard situation. And James writes, "As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy." One thing I love and hate about the book of Job is the Hollywood ending. Because he literally gets everything back and then some. He gets his crops. He gets his livestock. He and his wife have 10 more children. He doesn't get the original ones back, but he does get more children and a family once again. As God came through after this time of testing and struggle. Because at the beginning of that book, we have God and Satan talking, and Satan says the only reason Job is devoted to you is because he has all this stuff. And God said, "Okay, you can do anything you want except you cannot take his life." And so Satan took everything away. And God, being God, knew what would happen. Job was able to persevere through those struggles. He was able to persevere through those times. He wrestled and argued with God. And in the end, it worked out. In the end, God came through as Job passed that test. It's hard to be patient. It's hard to be patient when life is going a direction that we don't want it to go. And it's very tempting to grumble, to whine, to complain, to act like that 2-year-old in a toy store. And yet that doesn't change anything, does it? It doesn't speed things up. It doesn't fix it. So God calls us to be patient and to stand firm. So as we live in these last days, we live in a time where, I don't know that we're have the challenge that those hearers of the first century had. I haven't yet seen anybody standing out in the field waiting for Jesus to come back today. I think the challenge we have is that it has been so long that we wonder if it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and is it really going to happen for us in our lifetime? And so some questions to ponder. In what ways do we naturally live as though Christ were not coming back anytime soon? In what ways do our lives reflect just, this world's going to continue spinning forever? And how do we, as God's adopted children, live as though Christ were returning tomorrow? What are some things and some ways that we can live as we anticipate eagerly Jesus' return? Because it could happen today. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen to next week. It could happen 10, 20, 50, 1,000 years from now. No one knows. But we want to be ready when that happens. And so as we continue to walk this path, this journey as a community, we walk with steadfastness, and we seek to be patient and to stand firm. Stand firm in those promises that God has given us. Stand firm that this God who has spoken those promises will fulfill those promises. And so we join our voices together in reading these words from Isaiah 35.
Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, with the recompense of God. He will come and save you.
Amen. We'll continue the series on Wednesday night, taking a look at 2 Corinthians 9 with the theme of Purchase the Presents. The shopping days till Christmas are one.